And welcome back to the Upside Sports Network. My name is Michael. Appreciate you guys joining us on a Tuesday evening. We didn't do it Monday because of the national championship game, and what a blowout it was. Kind of wish we did our live then. But Carlos Correa signed this morning with the Minnesota Twins, 6 years, $200 million, with 4 vesting options that could bring the deal to $270 million. That's quite a saga anyway for Carlos Correa, who started two seasons ago with the Houston Astros. Basically found himself on the outside looking in that organization with the new up-and-coming player, Jeremy Pena, set to take over his role on that team, and the Astros just weren't willing to give him the long-term deal that he was looking for. He hits free agency along with a number of other shortstops, hoping to hit it rich anyway, and was hoping to get something similar to a Corey Seager-type contract, 10 years, $325 million. Ultimately, never got that level of offer last offseason anyway. The best offer he got was from the Detroit Tigers at the beginning of free agency before they signed Javi Baez to a 10-year, $275 million deal is what Carlos Correa was offered last offseason. Fast forward a few months anyway, and he signs with the Minnesota Twins. 3-year deal with opt-outs after the first and second year. Total value of $105 million. He only ultimately gets $35.3 million from the Twins last year. He goes into free agency this year. Again, a strong shortstop class out there. Trey Turner, Xander Bogaerts, Dansby Swanson. A number of shortstops anyway available for the picking, whichever team would like to get him, etc. And Carlos Correa ultimately found a really good deal. The AAV was significantly less than what he got with the Twins. He ultimately wasn't expected to go back to the Twins because of how things finished last year. He was hoping to get the money on a playoff team, something like that. And everybody on the outside looking in thought Carlos Correa was never going to end back up with the Minnesota Twins unless they completely outspent all the other teams. Well, the San Francisco Giants anyway ponied up $350 million over 13 years. And then, of course, the physical happened, and he failed the physical, issues with his ankle, an injury that he suffered back in 2014. Seemed to have resurfaced. A slide that he took into second base during the season with the Twins caused some discomfort and may have dislodged the plate a little bit. And that seems to be the sticking point right now. Welcome back, Mark. Appreciate you for joining us. But Carlos Correa ultimately decides, hey, I don't want to renegotiate this deal with the Giants. I understand the Mets are spending all kinds of money. Hey, Scott Boras, call Steve Cohen, see if you can get a deal done for me. A few hours after failing the physical and the news conference, or the introductory press conference to announce Carlos Correa as a San Francisco Giant is canceled, he has a new deal with the New York Mets, 12 years, $315 million guaranteed. Again, physical is the big thing here. Mets send down a private jet to Carlos Correa. Very smooth move here by the New York Mets. Very classy thing for the organization to do. Understanding Carlos Correa had this as a big issue with the Giants. Understands that this needs to be as seamless as possible. And lo and behold, another red flag on the physical. Now, of course, there was a couple weeks has passed anyway since the agreement with the Mets, and we started hearing rumors at the end of last week that the that the Minnesota Twins had at least started talking to Scott Boras about possibilities of bringing him in, and had actually started exchanging contract figures, which other teams, while they had expressed interest in bringing in Carlos Correa, hadn't expressed any as far as the contract length, what it might ultimately take to get him in. But the New York Mets, apparently their best offer was 6 years, $157.5 million guaranteed. Safe to say the Minnesota Twins offer was a good $40+ million more in guaranteed money. Now, the vesting options at the end of this contract work in the favor of the team, in my opinion. Looking at the vesting options, looking at plate appearances being the key factor in those vesting options, 575 plate appearances, what Carlos Correa would have to get in the final year of that 6-year contract to have the 7th year vest, I believe for $25 million, the next for $20 million, the next for $15 million, and the final year for $10 million. You're talking about Carlos Correa, who in 10 years will still be about 38 years old. He will be in the twilight of his career, yes, but if he's still the level of player that he is right now, or anywhere near that level of player, the Twins will certainly have a very good contract on their books for that end of the deal. You see all these big mega deals that always seem to bite him in the back end. Well, if you're hitting that threshold of plate appearances, that means the team wants you in the lineup, means you're being productive in the lineup, and your salary continues to go down. That's a win-win for Minnesota on the back end of the deal. Now, even if he doesn't hit those plate appearance thresholds, even if none of those vesting options hit, even if Carlos Correa says, hey, I'm an all-star level player, I want to hit it big once again, I'm not going to hit that plate appearance threshold because I want to hit free agency. Say all that happens. Even 6 years for a mega free agent like this, for the Minnesota Twins to be able to keep him in-house, especially after going out on a limb last offseason, giving him $35+ million per year over 3 years with opt-outs after the first and second year, was a big gamble by their franchise, and this was the biggest signing in free agency for them by far. Now they're able to retain him. This speaks well for them going forward as they try to recruit free agents in the future. The Minnesota Twins had one of the worst off seasons until this point right now. Now they bring in Carlos Correa, and they have one of the best off seasons in Major League Baseball. Funny how things switch just like that. Now, the Twins are said to still be interested in bringing in a frontline starting pitcher. You guys can check out the video that I posted earlier today, kind of detailing a lot of the mechanisms of what happened with the Carlos Correa sweepstakes, what's going to happen next for the Twins, what happens next for the Giants, the Mets, who has the best offseason, who has the worst. All those things you can check out in that video on our YouTube page. Make sure you follow us and subscribe. It's Upside Sports Network. You can follow us on Twitter at UpsideSN. Welcome back, Ryan. The ankle injury is bad. Well, he didn't miss time with it last year. That's the thing. He hasn't missed any significant time on the major league level with that injury. This is more of a long-term thing. Teams apparently see something that's red flagging. Doctors for both organizations, the Giants and the Mets, have red flagged that ankle, and possibly that ankle could need surgery down the line, or whatever the case may be. May need to replace the plate. Maybe it's a degenerative condition. None of us really know. The only people that really know are going to be the doctors who are examining him, the teams that have access to those medicals, and of course, Carlos Correa and his agent, Scott Boras. They aren't going to let that information out, I do not believe, but we can all speculate that there's something on that physical that could be detrimental to his career long term. That's why 6 years fully guaranteed is a good investment for the Minnesota Twins. And yes, they are paying a premium at that position. But I would argue Carlos Correa is one of the top 5 shortstops in Major League Baseball. I know there's some out there that would argue he's 1 or 2. But as far as this year's free agency class, the top 2 options, in my opinion, were Trey Turner and Carlos Correa. And the fact that the Minnesota Twins were able to retain him with as many interested teams as there were interested in bringing in Carlos Correa speaks volumes of what they're willing to do as a franchise to make their team a success. Now, of course, Carlos Correa does have red flags with the medical. This isn't exactly a cheap contract for them over the next several years, but this does mean that they're able to recruit future free agents because they not only invested in him last offseason, but they're able to get the long-term deal this offseason. And that's where agents are going to say, hey, this team works with us as far as players, as far as agents, etc. And so we're going to try to steer our clients to at least investigate the possibility of signing with the Minnesota Twins. So good on Minnesota for getting the contract done. For the New York Mets, understandably, they've spent a lot of money this offseason. They really wanted to add another big bat to that lineup. That's what Steve Cohen said when the agreement was basically announced, saying, hey, I wanted to add another big bat to this lineup. And that's what they should have done, I thought, this entire offseason. Bring in some type of big hitter to that lineup, whether that be a middle-of-the-order bat, whether that be another leadoff hitter, somebody who could play third, an outfield corner bat, something like that. Maybe somebody who can give an off day to Nimmo, maybe a DH. They could have gone a number of different ways, maybe even a catcher. But the New York Mets, I think, are still going to be just fine because of how they've invested in this team. But Carlos Correa certainly would have put them over the top, in my opinion, in that division. The Braves are going to be good. We'll talk a little bit here in just a moment about what the Phillies have been doing. Phillies are going to be very good as well, especially once Bryce Harper gets back. But the New York Mets will not have Carlos Correa for the next 12 years. But congratulations to the Minnesota Twins on getting your player. We'll see what you end up doing the rest of this offseason, see if you make that big trade for an ace. Now, I mentioned a minute ago about the Soto trade. That happened as well. Gregory Soto, anyway, coming over from the Detroit Tigers, anyway, along with Cody Clemens in exchange for Nick Maton, Matt Vierling, and I can't remember the other piece of that deal. Donnie Sands, the catcher. Gregory Soto was the reliever anyway. Lefty reliever. The Phillies have done a nice job retooling that bullpen. That has been a problem for them over the last 3 or 4 years. Last year, not quite as much of a problem. But now that they're going to have a youngster going into that rotation, Painter, lengthening out that bullpen, making it a little bit tougher to get through in the 7th, 8th, and 9th inning, not having to ride Alvarado when he's tired, etc., giving them some more depth options back there is a good option to have for their manager. So as far as the Philadelphia Phillies, they brought in Taijuan Walker already this offseason. They brought in Trey Turner. They've already done a nice piece of work getting that team kind of going in the right direction. They've brought in Craig Kimbrell as well to kind of be that 9th inning guy, possibly, maybe even an 8th inning guy. We'll see how things go. But a nice move bringing in Gregory Soto. The Atlanta Braves have also done a nice job kind of retooling that bullpen as well on the cheap, a different way of doing it than what the Phillies have done. Phillies have kind of parceled out those the 10-year contract offer along with the that's kind of been the industry standard so far this offseason is about a $10 million deal to kind of get the back end of that bullpen kind of solved. Mets did something similar with Adam Ottavino. That was 2 years, $14 million. But nice work there by the Philadelphia Phillies trying to get some meat back there in that bullpen to make them a little bit more tough to face. Welcome back, Bryce. Why do I have Soto to the Phillies in the title for Gregory Soto? All those 3 weeks just for that. That sucks for them. Well, it does, but I mean, for the New York Mets, it wasn't necessarily a big loss for them. I mean, it's Carlos Correa, so it's a big loss for anybody, I suppose. But in terms of what they've already done this offseason, plus they already had an option in-house in Escobar. So, yes, it does hurt to not have that middle-of-the-order bat in that lineup, somebody who could really have pushed you over the top. But it's not like they're going to be a below 500 team now because Carlos Correa isn't going to go there. The Minnesota Twins, you couldn't necessarily say that about them. You're talking about taking away one of the most important leaders in Major League Baseball right now, away from a team that struggled in the second half of the year with Carlos Correa on the team. I understand the issues that they had at the back half of of last year anyway, but I thought their team overall, they were built the right way. Their bullpen, they have a really good bullpen going into this year. Their starting staff has been beefed up a little bit. They still don't have a number one option at the head of that rotation. That's the one thing missing out of that rotation. They've improved their catching spot with Christian Vazquez coming in. Joey Gallo's kind of a boom or bust player. I'm expecting a little bit more boom this year than bust. Look out for him to be a comeback player of the year, as was mentioned on MLB Network this morning. But we'll see how things work out in Minnesota. But Carlos Correa not going back to Minnesota probably makes them finish below 500 no matter what they end up doing the rest of the way this offseason. Carlos Correa going back gets them right back into contention for the division crown. If they get a frontline rotation starter, which we'll dig into here in just a moment, if they make that happen, I think they're a shoo-in for AL Central champion and then could possibly be talked about as a World Series contender. Without Carlos Correa, none of that is possible. Now, as far as starting pitching, the Minnesota Twins have long been trying to find a frontline starting pitcher. We heard all offseason about their number one priority is Carlos Correa. If they don't get that done, they would have pivoted to Carlos Rodon. If they didn't get that done, they were talking about possibly having Luis Arraez on the trade block to possibly bring in a Corbin Burns or a Brendan Woodruff, somebody who could headline that rotation. Woodruff I don't think would be a headliner, but Burns certainly would be. But something like that would be very unique for Minnesota. Do I think they'll trade Luis Arraez? No, I do not. Do I think they have the wherewithal to do something unique to try to get themselves, over the top in that Central Division, a very winnable division with the Guardians, who had a nice performance last year out of a very young team, and then the White Sox, who had a poor performance last year but should be a little bit better coming into this season with the additions that they've made with Benintendi and Clevenger. There's no real hole in that rotation anyway, and so I'm expecting that White Sox team to be much better. But if you're looking at that AL Central, it is certainly winnable for the Minnesota Twins. You just can't have a collapse like you did in the second half of last year. August and September were terrible for the starting rotation for the Twins. They should be better just with what they have right now, but we'll see how things pan out for the Twins. If they get a frontline starter, like I mentioned, we can consider them probably the likely favorite to win that AL Central, and then we can start looking at the next step about them being considered a contender for the World Series in the American League. Is it me or the trade market kind of quiet? The trade market is actually starting to percolate a little bit. We're starting to see some headlines today anyway. I got a video coming out tomorrow about Johnny Cueto. Already filmed it. Just got to make the thumbnail for you guys tomorrow. You guys can check out that video. I know, Anthony, if you're watching, you're a big Marlins fan, about them getting Johnny Cueto. I think that makes a trade for Pablo Lopez very, very, very likely at this point. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if Miami trades away 2 starters because they have some starting pitching depth, plus they have starters coming that should be very high-level starting pitchers once they hit the big leagues. With Johnny Cueto coming in, they don't have to rush those guys because they already have an in-house option under contract for 1 year, possibly a second option or a second year if the option is indeed picked up. But as far as the Miami Marlins, I think Pablo Lopez is likely out the door, possibly Jesus Luzardo. In my opinion, Pablo Lopez, the teams that have been mentioned with him before, the Toronto Blue Jays, the New York Yankees, the Los Angeles Dodgers, and the St. Louis Cardinals. I think the Yankees are most interested in him. I don't think they'll end up getting him just because I don't think they like the package that the Yankees are offering. They don't really like Peraza, other teams do. They don't really like Torres, other teams do. And just for Pablo Lopez, they're looking for position player upside. So if they're looking to make a trade for a guy like Pablo Lopez, you're looking at possibly Jason Dominguez being a guy that interests them. But again, he's another guy that not necessarily knocking the socks off of the Marlins teams, or off the Miami Marlins front office. But other teams that have been said to be in the mix as well, I missed one, is the Boston Red Sox. Bringing in a guy like Tristan Casas has been mentioned in a trade for Pablo Lopez. The Toronto Blue Jays could trade a guy who had a down year in the first half of the last year, Orelvis Martinez, in the minor leagues. I didn't see how he finished out the year anyway, but the Toronto Blue Jays could use Pablo Lopez as their number 5 starter. Right now they're looking at either Kikuchi or possibly Mitch White. Hyun-Jin Ryu is not expected to be back until after the All-Star break, and you can't really count on him for innings, but bringing in Pablo Lopez, a number 3 type starter on a great, when he's really on, he's a number 2, but that would really lengthen out and give that rotation some stability. Rotation that had some poor performance in it last year with Jose Barrios. And then, of course, the consistent performance that they brought in with Chris Bassett. They're looking to improve that rotation. They've already done a number of things this offseason. Mark just mentions that they brought in Brendan Belt, 1 year, $9.3 million deal is, I believe, what he signed for. Had a down year last year, very un-Brandon Belt-like year, but he should be back to normal, hopefully with a more offensive ballpark to play in, like Toronto. And we'll see what kind of numbers Brendan Belt puts up. By the way, he's a local boy from where I am, so hopefully he has a nice year there with Toronto. But Bryce, you do mention the Padres are showing interest in Nelson Cruz. There are a few teams interested in bringing him in. He had he had a better first half of the year than he did second half, and it just seems like age is catching up to him. I wonder what type of a deal he ends up signing. Does he get a full league guaranteed contract, or does he get a heavily incentive-laden deal? If, say, he's hitting 200 by the end of May, does a team say, all right, time to cut ties and not have all this money tied into them? Or do they have that incentive, or do they have the guarantee and just have to leave him on the roster and hopefully he corrects himself? But if I'm the Padres, you're looking to kind of improve that team in any way you possibly can. They went out of the box this year and went out and added Xander Bogaerts. They've supposedly added Kim and Gresham on the trade block. I'm not sure how accurate that is. I'm not sure they're really willing to trade either piece because they still have a little bit of a hole out there in the outfield. I understand they're going to want to put Tatis out there. Grisham could, of course, play center, I suppose, and then Soto out there. But Tatis, of course, hasn't really played the outfield much before, and so having some in-house options already there to have played that position before would work well for the Padres organization. So I'm not sure they want to trade away from a position that they don't necessarily have the deepest right now. You really like Brendan Belt signing in Toronto. He hit almost 30 home runs in 21. Exactly. I do like the position or the signing as well. I think people are starting to overstate the importance of left-handed hitting in that Toronto lineup. I'm still not a fan of that trade that they made for Teoscar Hernandez right now. And the more I see the way their offseason's unfolded, I love the trade for Varsho. Don't get me wrong. I love the trade. It was expensive. It cost you another outfielder in Gurriel, who I think is a very good offensive weapon for you. It cost you an up-and-coming catcher, but you already have two. I get it. Varsho's a very nice player and has played catcher before, so he could possibly fill in if, say, Kirk can no longer catch at one point. And Varsho is on a significantly longer deal than Gurriel. Gurriel has 1 year left on his deal. Teoscar Hernandez also had 1 year left on his deal. But the impact bat of a guy like Teoscar Hernandez, I think, will be missed in that lineup. Sure, they added Kiermaier, not exactly an offensive threat anymore, but is a left-handed hitter at least. Brendan Belt, another left-handed hitter in that lineup when you don't necessarily want to have all righties in there. And so I think Belt will serve them well. A little bit rich of a contract anyway for a bench-type bat, somebody who's going to be DHing a lot. Probably going to get you 300, maybe 400 at bats. And I guess when you consider Jock Peterson's going to get 400 at bats for the Giants for $19 million, I guess this is a little bit of a deal. But for at this point in free agency, that seems like a little bit rich of a contract, especially when I'm sure other teams out there were probably offering him full-time spots on their roster for lesser money. And I guess that's what you have to do to get it done for Toronto, but that still seems like a little bit rich of a contract. But he should still have a nice year in Toronto. Welcome back, Robert. In your opinion, in both leagues, who would you consider the best pitcher and best everyday player? Okay, the American League, I can't really consider Shohei Ohtani. You got to take him out because he's technically both. But he's not necessarily the best at either one. If you're saying, combined cumulatively, sure, Shohei Ohtani's number one. But on the American League side, pound for pound, the best pitcher in all of baseball, American League or National League, is Jacob deGrom when healthy. The key there is when healthy. So I'll still stick with Jacob deGrom for right now until he's proven otherwise. As far as hitter in the American League, Aaron Judge, again, far and away the best hitter in the American League. It wasn't really close. Led 19 of the 20 major offensive categories in the American League last year, and nothing's really changed my mind as to going into 2023 that's going to change at all. On the NL side, that's a little bit more interesting. As far as pitcher, Verlander is now in the NL. If he stays healthy, he's going to be in the conversation. Scherzer, I think, has started to fall off just a hair. I'm not saying he's outside of the top 10 or anything like that, but he's not necessarily 1 or 2 for me anymore. Burns, when he's on, is up there. Wheeler, when he's on, is up there. Urias as well. There's some good options on the National League side. I don't think you can really go wrong. Max Fried is in that conversation. I'll go Verlander just because he won the Cy Young. And until he's proven to be unhealthy again, which I think is possible this year, I'll go with Verlander on the NL side for a pitcher. For an everyday player, the consistency of a Freddie Freeman is tough to beat, but he doesn't necessarily play a premium defensive position at first base. Now, don't get me wrong, he's a stellar first baseman, but it's not like he's a shortstop or a center fielder, something like that. Mookie Betts comes into mind as well. Manny Machado comes into mind. Ronald Acuna is in there. For a bat, I'd probably say Freddie Freeman, but for overall player, I would probably say Mookie Betts just because he's more of an outfielder. He can play second base, as we mentioned this offseason. Sandy Alcantara has got to be in that conversation as well, as Mark notes. Alcantara is very good. I just think the Marlins ask him to do too much. I think if he was in a different situation where they actually could put some runs on the board for him, I think Alcantara's numbers would look even better, and people would really start to notice the eye-popping things he's been doing down in Miami. But it's Miami. Nobody wants to talk about Miami Marlins baseball. And in a couple of years, when they have another guy just like Sandy Alcantara coming up, maybe then will be the next window when everybody can say, "Hey, holy smokes, they really got a pitching staff down there. If they could only hit, out of a wet paper bag, then maybe they'd really have something." Franmil Reyes to Texas. Not a fan of that type of a move. The Rangers already have enough DH type options on their roster with Mitch Garver, Sam Huff, whoever they don't want to catch that day, whoever they want to take out of the field for a day, give a day off in the field, let them DH, etc. I think they need to focus more on a left field type option, somebody with some athleticism, somebody who can get on base, some speed. There's a lot of free agents that have already been sucked up this offseason. I thought Pollock would have been a nice fit just because of the higher batting average from 20 and 21 with the Dodgers. Had a down year last year with the Chicago White Sox, but I still think a veteran bat would have been better than anything the Rangers had last year. In case you guys are wondering, the worst position in all of baseball last year was the Texas Rangers left field. That was absolutely abysmal, a good 100 points lower than any other team in OPS, than any other team in Major League Baseball. It was atrocious. The second best, I think, was a full 100 points better, and that was the LA Angels. They improved their spot in the outfield. Now it's time for the Rangers to do the same. The best free agent left on the board would be Jurickson Profar. I still would love him to come into Texas. Would be a good kind of a multi-use player. Somebody you could play at third base, shortstop, second base, first base. Whenever you want to give somebody a day off, kind of a super utility player, much like they used with Michael Young back in the day. Profar had a great year with the bat last year by his standards. Got to see if that bat really stays at that level of production. If it does, then the Rangers could have something. However, I still don't think that's the way the Rangers are leaning. I think they want to go with some type of a trade route, possibly a buy low candidate in Tyler O'Neill. A year ago, anyway, had 39 home runs with the St. Louis Cardinals. Last year, dealt with a myriad of different type of injuries, anyway, and it really sucked down his offensive numbers. We'll see how he performs this coming season. But he's got 2 years left to control. We'll see how they end up going. The San Francisco Giants improved their pitching staff. They recently signed Luke Jackson. Yes, they did. I think it was a 2-year, $11 million deal. $3 million the first year, $6.5 the second, with some money on the front end of that deal as well. I still don't like what the Giants have done this offseason. In my opinion, they had the worst offseason in all of Major League Baseball this season, and it wasn't even close. Just from the expectations from the outside looking in, front office said, hey, we originally have a chance to bring in a guy like Aaron Judge. Then it was their responsibility to let their fan base know realistic expectations for Aaron Judge. They let it slip out to the media multiple times in the lead up to the breaking news from John Heyman that turned out to be erroneous, that they were, not only considered neck and neck for the Yankees for Aaron Judge, like we all thought they would be all along, but that Aaron Judge was starting to lean their direction. They were starting to move on to the next step in the process of what was the other superstar they were going to bring in along with Aaron Judge. And so kind of set up kind of unrealistic expectations for what the offseason could hold for their fan base. They kind of fell on their face for the, third time in the last 3 years trying to chase down some of these top flight free agents and failing once again. Then they get the deal for Correa. We mentioned that at the top of the show. That deal, of course, evaporating right in front of their hands just because he wants to go to the Mets and doesn't even want to negotiate after failing the physical. And then you mentioned their other moves that they made. Love the move for Mitch Haniger. Absolutely love it. 1-year investment for Jock Peterson isn't the end of the world. I like the moves that they made in the rotation. However, they no longer have, Carlos Rodon to kind of headline that rotation along with Logan Webb. They're going to feel that this year, but maybe they get some really stellar performances out of Ross Stripling and Sean Manaea, place the qualifying offer on them next year, possibly get some draft pick compensation back, have all this money freed up to go after Shohei Ohtani, Manny Machado, any of these other free agents that are out there. Brandon Crawford's on a 1-year deal. And so they have a lot of money to be freed up for next offseason. But the worst offseason in baseball, by far, is the San Francisco Giants. Second is still the Boston Red Sox, even after getting the extension done with Rafael Devers. They look like a team that's headed towards a rebuild. Sorry, Boston fans, I just don't think your roster is very good. I don't think you have a lot coming through the pipeline. Kyle Bloom's kind of destroyed that franchise, in my opinion. I don't think he survives after this coming season. We should see a new GM in there. Everybody should start realizing that the Pittsburgh Pirates GM, the one that came from Boston, Ben Sherrington, Everybody should start giving that man a round of applause for the way he's able to build up a prospect system and build up a consistent winning team. You're about to see what the fruits of his labor in Pittsburgh towards the end of this season and beginning in 2024. So keep your eyes peeled for what Pittsburgh's going to do in that NL Central. They're going to start seeing some fruits of that farm system coming up in the next couple of years. They don't really have the top end rotation pieces in the minors. That's why the trade for Brian Reynolds, they're asking for some starting pitching back in return. So keep your eyes peeled for the return for Brian Reynolds when ultimately he will be traded. What do you think Jurickson Profar's contract could look like? I think we're probably looking somewhere in the neighborhood of 3 years, $30 million. Look at the contract Brennan Belt just signed. Profar's much younger, super utility guy. Can kind of flex him all over the diamond. And I really like what he's able to do, able to hit leadoff for a team. Just he's able to take whatever the team needs him to do and just go out there and do it and get the job done. Now, is he a stellar defender at any one specific position? No, but he's able to hold it down to where you're not necessarily losing, defense by having him out there. He can fill in anywhere for, say you lose somebody for a month because of a hamstring pull. Say you lose somebody for a month because, they, hurt their shin or whatever, fouling a ball off their foot or whatever the case may be. Profar could be your starter for a month at any one of those positions, and you'd be comfortable with him in that spot without having to call up somebody from the minors and hope they can at least hit their way out of a paper bag and see if they can get something out of him. Profar gives you a little bit better offense and at least league average defense defensively wherever you put him in the field. You're anticipating the return of DeSclafani. Okay, but again, not exactly moving the needle. Judge had no intentions of signing with the Giants. He used the Giants as leverage to get every last penny from the Yankees. I don't necessarily think that's true. I do think he had very real interest in going to San Francisco. You saw the the Times magazine or the Time magazine interview where his 10-year goal was to be playing with the San Francisco Giants, married, all those kinds of things, having a kid. And I think it was a very real threat for him to go to San Francisco. Do I think that he was drawn even more to the Yankees? I do. But I wouldn't say that the Giants were just there as a what do you call it, a Trojan horse anyway, and just say, hey, Yankees, up your offer, otherwise I'll go over here. Hey, but I have really no intention of going over there. I think if the Yankees hadn't come correct with their offer, he very well would have taken that deal. And I think if the Giants had been given another opportunity to negotiate with Aaron Judge, they probably would have gone even higher than, say, a 10-year, $400 million contract that we all thought that he would ultimately get. I think if he had actually let San Francisco negotiate with him after talking to Hal Steinbrenner and getting the 9-year, $360 that he got, I think he very well could have gotten north of that $400 million, possibly $425, maybe even $450, because I think the Giants absolutely needed that level of impact bat in their lineup. Actually, San Francisco Giants improved from last year. Sure, but you're not exactly better than the Arizona Diamondbacks. I think there's a case to be made that even after the trade for Varsho, who proved himself to be good at the major league level, that the Diamondbacks have spread out their talent a little bit. They're going to have some outfielders coming up to the major league level this year to take the place of Varsho. Gurriel could be used in the outfield or move back to the infield since he's not exactly a plus defender out there. He has played the infield before. I think the Diamondbacks are coming and could possibly take over that third spot in the NL West. Do I think they're going to win the division? Absolutely not, but I don't think the Giants are going to sniff playoff contention this year. And while I think there's some fans out there that like to point to Wilmer Flores and J.D. Davis as nice pieces for their team, if you're counting on those two to lead you to the pennant or to win that division or to get you to the World Series, I think you're sorely mistaken. I think your next key window or your next window of contention is going to be whoever you end up signing in free agency next year, if you can convince them to take your money. And after the failure of the last 3 off seasons, that conversation is going to be much more difficult to have. We started this video, this live anyway, talking about how important it was for Carlos Correa and the Minnesota Twins to get that agreement. Minnesota is now going to be looked at as a team that can possibly be a player-friendly team, somebody that agents and players are going to look at and say, hey, this is a place that served Carlos Correa or did Carlos Correa right when other teams may or may not have done so. And so they're at least going to have a foot in the door with those free agents. They would not have had that if Carlos Correa said, well, I tried it, it didn't work out, I moved on. The next big free agent that the Minnesota Twins would have been able to sign would have been in 20 or 30 years. The San Francisco Giants, you can take a page from the Dallas Mavericks in the NBA. After they won their championship in 2011, the Dallas Mavericks said, hey, the salary cap structure, the way money is going to be flowing into the game, it's going to change the way we do business. And so they said, all right, we're going to cut payroll. We're not going to bring back the same team we had last year. We're going to try to retool, get younger, and try to be a little bit better that way. And so they kind of spoiled the second half of Dirk Nowitzki's career and never were able to go out there and bring in the big fish. Sure, did they get close? Absolutely. There was more than a couple of free agents that they were right on the doorstep of. Dwight Howard, DeAndre Jordan. There's a couple other free agents in there that the Dallas Mavericks, year after year after year, Kemba Walker before he went to Boston anyway, they were right in there for a lot of free agents and never ultimately got the top free agent. And now we're seeing that they're doing it differently. They brought in Luka, of course, through the draft. They're making trades. They're making small additions to this roster. They're not selling out their roster and gutting it to be able to sign the top free agent. The San Francisco Giants, even though they're going to have all kinds of money next year, they're going to clear out a whole bunch of positions. You're going to have to be able to piece that team together, and we'll see if they're able to do it. I think that they could. The Rangers have certainly done it over the last couple of years, but they've had to pay a premium at the beginning of free agency in order to legitimize themselves in the eyes of players and agents. And so the Giants are going to have to do something similar next offseason. The Shohei Ohtani contract next year is going to probably be in the neighborhood of 10 years, $500 million. If I'm the Shohei Ohtani camp, I'm looking at the Giants and saying, hey, I want to play for a winner. That's why I'm leaving the Angels. What exactly about your team is going to convince me to come to you? And if he looks at that roster and says, hey, this isn't a World Series contending roster, you're going to have to way overpay for his services, $575 million, way more than what could possibly be in the market from any other team for Shohei Ohtani, even though he may be the most valuable player ever in Major League Baseball history. But the Giants certainly are going to have an uphill battle to climb as they try to negotiate with free agents because of their failures, not just this offseason, but the last two off seasons before this one. Would you say Brian Reynolds is a star or a superstar? I would say he's very comparable to Brendan Nimmo. So if you think Brendan Nimmo is on the precipice of becoming a superstar, sure. If you think he's more of a star level player, then I'd go more of a star. But for me, I don't think he's a number one, or I don't think he's the face of your franchise type player. I do think he could be your number 3 or 4 type piece in your franchise, and your franchise would be very good. Right now, the Pittsburgh Pirates, they brought him in anyway in the trade with the San Francisco Giants for Andrew McCutchen. Kind of funny now, all these years later, Andrew McCutchen may ultimately end up going back to Pittsburgh after they lose Brian Reynolds via trade. So kind of a full circle there for Pittsburgh. But as far as Brian Reynolds, I think he'd be a very good option in New York. I think he'd be a very good option in LA. I think he'd be a very good option in Texas. Those are probably the 3 most likely teams for him. We'll see who ends up ponying up the prices for him. I think the Rangers have the pitching prospects possibly to be able to get it done. It's just going to be very expensive, and I'm not sure they're going to want to give up that level of prospect. The Dodgers, of course, have tons of offensive talent. They're going to have to deal from the elite level starting pitching, young guys that they already have ready to go. Dustin May, somebody at that level. There's other top flight prospects that they have in their system that they could trade. The Yankees, I'm not sure they really have the pieces that are going to work for a Brian Reynolds trade. Sure, they could go the position player route, but the Pittsburgh Pirates are said to be wanting pitching first, not position players. So kind of keep your eyes peeled for what happens with Brian Reynolds. What offensive stats would you consider a player needs to be considered a superstar? I don't necessarily think it's about one specific stat or any group of specific stats. I think it's his overall impact on the game. One of them that a lot of people like to point to is runs created plus, or win probability added, or OPS, or slug percentage, and all of those play a part. But to me, it's your impact on the team, impact on your franchise. For instance, Manny Machado goes to the San Diego Padres years ago, and they become legitimate. You look at the Eric Hosmer signing; they got, or at least got the ball rolling to get players like Manny Machado to agree to go to San Diego anyway. Hosmer was not a superstar player, never was. He was a nice player. He was a star first baseman at the time, but he was not a superstar. But he certainly got the ball rolling to where they could acquire superstar level talent. And we'll see how things work out ultimately in San Diego if they're ultimately able to get a World Series. But there's a difference between star players and superstars. And as far as any single specific stat, I don't think there's any group of stats anyway that could define one or the other. I think it's more of the overall makeup of the player and their impact on the team. Welcome back, Mark. Do you think the Orioles will take a step back and Mike Minor is a veteran left-hander who can help them? 98 innings pitched last year. What do you think of another veteran like him? I don't think the Orioles will take a step back. I think this is only the beginning for the Orioles. I think at worst, you're probably looking maybe a couple games back, but that's not a step back for the organization. They're just trying to buy time for the young guys to get to the major league level. Adley Rutschman is going to be in the MVP conversation for the next decade, so kind of keep that in mind if you're a Baltimore Orioles fan. Don't sell out to try to make the playoffs this year. Don't mortgage your future. Don't trade away the prospects that you've built or that you've tried to save up this entire time. You need to hang on to them. Do not make a crazy trade like bringing in Pablo Lopez and saying, "Hey, we need starting pitching," and mortgaging your future because you need starting pitching. Don't do that type of a move. Now, as far as your comment about Mike Minor, I certainly would go more the veteran route. Mike Minor, I think, would be a useful veteran, somebody who's had time in the bullpen and as a starter. That type of a player, whether he's had a good year in the past or last year or not, I don't think that matters a hill of beans to the Orioles. They just need some veterans in there that can eat some level of innings. That's the important part for them. That's why a guy like Johnny Cueto would have been nice for them. Somebody that's a low-cost option that's not going to eat into their future prospect pool. In regard to starting pitcher, what do you consider a quality start? Well, the industry standard is what, 6 innings, 3 earned runs or less? And I think that's pretty much the same right now. There's a case to be made to lower it to 5 innings, but I'm not buying it. I still think a quality start should still be 6 innings. I think it should still be 3 earned runs or less. And I think a quality start also should also be judged on the impact that you have. For instance, it's not going to go down as a quality start, but I remember going to the game with the Texas Rangers back in August. Martin Perez gave up like a 7 spot to the Minnesota Twins in like the 4th inning. And pretty much in years past, he would have been cooked. You'd had to burn your bullpen, and that would ruin your bullpen for the rest of the series, the rest of the weekend, and just set yourself back. But Martin Perez stuck through, got through that inning, got through, I think, 2 more innings after that, and was able to save that bullpen down the line. And that was a quality start in my mind. Now, it's not going to go down one in the books, but I'm sure he certainly had the appreciation of that dugout, of that bullpen, and of his manager for the effort he gave. And that's one of the biggest reasons, one of the biggest improvements Martin Perez has made. Even when he has one of those bad outings, he can still right the ship and be able to get you some innings to save that bullpen, to keep you in contention for the rest of that series. Even though you may be down 7-1 in that game, if he gets you through 6 innings, you turn it over to the bullpen, your long reliever gets you 2 or 3, then you've only burned Martin Perez and maybe 1 or 2 other pitchers out of the bullpen. You go into the next game with a fully rested bullpen aside from one guy. That speaks volumes for the things Martin Perez did last year for the Rangers. And as far as the quality start stat, it's important for, when you're keeping the stat, to also keep in mind starts like that save bullpens, that make that team work a little bit better. Yeah, if I'm Rangers, I'm not trading the farm for Reynolds. I don't think he's a superstar yet. 260, 27 home runs isn't a superstar talent. Do I think he's a superstar talent? By today's markers for what a center fielder should do, I think he's in that conversation. Do I think he absolutely is a superstar? No, but he's certainly a little bit better than what a star level player is. And we're talking semantics between star and superstar. But you just said it right there. He's a center fielder who brings you, 27 home runs? If he goes to Texas, he probably plays left. If he goes to the Yankees, he probably plays a combination of left or center. So we'll see how things work out. But Brian Reynolds is certainly going to command a hefty price via trade wherever he ends up going. I'm just not sure that the Rangers should pay that price. If I'm them, I go another route via trade, possibly even eat a contract a little bit like a Christian Yelich. Wouldn't cost me anything, and in fact, I think the Brewers might pay me a little bit, maybe even give me pieces that I need for my future in a trade for a Christian Yelich. I would go that route if I'm the Texas Rangers. Stay underneath the luxury tax if you can, and then spend a little bit more next year to try to bring in one more big-time bat next offseason. But I don't really like the idea of Brian Reynolds coming to Texas just because it's going to, wipe out a lot of what you've gained in the farm system. You haven't had a second or third round pick this year or next year anyway. And while they've done a nice job in the draft, bringing in Kumar Rocker and Brock Porter, in my opinion, the best draft out of everybody last year was the Texas Rangers, and they didn't have a second or a third round pick. And I think the Rangers are going to have a little bit more difficult time because they don't necessarily have this class scouted out as much because of the familiarity that they had with Kumar Rocker last year. But we'll see how things work out for the Rangers and their future, which way they go, if they go the Reynolds route or if they go another route. You can see Trevor Bauer going to the Orioles or A's to lay low. I don't think he goes to either one of those. I think you'd go to a team that's trying to win a World Series. I think that's where it could end up happening. Has he been, convicted of anything? No. But from a PR standpoint, a team has to be able to weather that. The A's aren't exactly the team that's going to be able to do that. You're going to have all kinds of outcries. A team that's trying to rebuild and trying to have the right type of mentality in that clubhouse, and you're bringing in Trevor Bauer as a veteran for that pitching staff to look up to. Not sure if that's the right move. Orioles, same kind of a thing. So if I'm a team like, say, the Mets, the Rangers are trying to win right now. The Braves are trying to win right now. Yankees are trying to win right now. The Blue Jays are trying to win right now. Teams like that need an ace at the top of their rotation, that are looking to try to compete for a World Series or at least a playoff spot. Those are the teams I would expect Trevor Bauer to have interest in, and for teams to have interest in him. They got to be able to handle the PR nightmare, so you're not going to be able to take or give them to teams that are not going to be able to withstand the heat that they're going to take for bringing him in. So I would not say the Orioles or A's would be good options. How significant is pitcher's earned run average? Pitching 6 innings, allowing 3 runs is a 4.5 ERA. That's a terrible ERA. Yes and no. I think you want to keep your ERA under 4, I think is the general rule of thumb for pitchers anyway. So over the course of a season, you generally, if you're a decent enough pitcher, you can get that ERA around 3.8, 3.9, etc. If you're able to go 7 innings one day and get you 3 earned runs, some days you're going to go 4 innings and give up 5. But overall, the more innings or more outings that you have of better production, say 2 earned runs over 7, then you can kind of get your ERA down. But as far as to answer your question, how significant is the ERA stat? Not quite as good as ERA plus. I like the ones that are adjusted for both defense and park adjusted as well. So, for instance, Carlos Rodon last year had a 2.88 earned run average, and his defense was terrible. He played in a pitcher-friendly ballpark, and still that defense was terrible. His adjusted ERA was 2.15. That's how dominant Carlos Rodon was. If he had played with a better defense last year, we're talking about probably the Cy Young winner in the NL, but Alcantara pitched really well. I think it had been neck and neck between the two, but that defense was atrocious for San Francisco last year. It should be slightly better with Haniger coming on board, but you're going to have Jock Peterson out there in left or Conforto. Both of them are liabilities out there on defense for the Giants, and so, as far as to answer your question, how significant is it? I would rather lean towards ERA plus, some type of a park adjustment, defense adjustment, etc., rather than ERA. If I'm Texas, you go for Max Kepler and see what happens. Shouldn't cost much. Yeah, but it's not going to cost nothing either. And if you're going after Max Kepler, it's been 3 years since he was the player that teams really desired. He's had average seasons, I guess, is what you'd call it at best over the last 3 years. But it's been a minute since Kepler was, off to that hot start that he was when he first came out of the gate with the Twins. Now, I'd be more interested in one of the prospects on that Minnesota Twins team. Kirilloff, Larnach, somebody like that. If you're looking for a prospect or somebody young, controllable prospect to kind of come in and take the range of that role. But if you're going that route, I would rather go with Ezekiel Duran out there in left. He's supposedly been playing winter ball this offseason anyway, and had been playing exclusively in the outfield. So maybe he's the outfielder next season for the Texas Rangers if they're not able to get something done. But thank you guys for joining us here tonight. We'll have some videos coming out for you guys tomorrow. Make sure you join us for that as well. Make sure you hit that like button on this video. Really does help us out when you hit that like button and subscribe. You can check out our Carlos Correa video that we posted today. And look forward to the Johnny Cueto video along with the Soto video that we're going to be making here in just a moment. But appreciate you guys joining us. If you have any questions about Major League Baseball's hot stove, trades that we could see over the next couple of months, feel free to submit a comment on this video or any of the other videos out there, and we'll try to respond to you either in the comments of that video or the next time we go live. So make sure you join us when we do go live. Follow us, subscribe to us here on YouTube, Upside Sports Network. Follow us on Twitter at UpsideSN, and find our Facebook page, Upside Sports Network. NFL playoffs are here. The Dallas Cowboys face Tampa Bay on Monday night. You have the Giants going against the Vikings. You have the 49ers going up against the Seahawks. 49ers, I think, are going to wipe the floor with them, unfortunately. A nice season, comeback story anyway for Geno Smith, but 49ers are the better team, even with Brock Purdy at quarterback, a inexperienced starting quarterback, we'll put it that way. Tom Brady is Tom Brady, but I think the Cowboys are going to win this one. Usually a team with a decent NFL quarterback Usually comes back after a horrible performance and absolutely plays locked down the next week. So kind of keep your eyes peeled for what happens in that Dallas-Tampa Bay game. But again, it's Tom Brady, so you never really know. Everybody's picking the Giants over the Vikings. I am not one of them. I am not a believer in Daniel Jones. I have not been a believer in Daniel Jones since he entered the NFL. I do really like Brian Dable as coach. They just need a little bit better quarterback and a little bit better use of their weapons on the outside. They kind of had a revolving door at the wide receiver spot all year long. Kadarius Toney was traded to the Kansas City Chiefs in the middle of the season. Galladay never really had an impact either. Saquon Barkley, who's been injured the last couple of years, finally started to come on. The running game is a little bit better. The Vikings defense isn't exactly a world beater or isn't even average at this point. They had a nice game against Nathan Peterman and the Chicago Bears, but that's not exactly exciting me. But I still think the Vikings are a better team and should be able to close things out there. Now, if things hold, that means that you're probably going to see Eagles versus the Cowboys in round 2. That would be a very interesting game. If Jalen Hurts is fully healthy and is back with another week of rest, then it should be an Eagles win. And I'm a Cowboys fan. The Eagles should win that game. But we'll see how things go. And then you'd have 49ers and Vikings. I think the 49ers would win that one. On the AFC side of it, Posey question. I did not see a Posey question. Let me see. I don't see a Posey question. I still don't see a Posey question. Cruz to Padres. Welcome back, Cobra. I think that'd be a nice option for the Padres. Bubba Thompson's going to be a real deal. The bags are bigger this year. Yes, he is. I think any base stealer will be better this year. But on the AFC side of it, the Jaguars are going to be at home facing the LA Chargers. I think the Chargers should be the better team. They have some revenge here on the line. The Jaguars did beat them earlier this year. I think the Chargers should win that game. I think the Buffalo Bills are going against the Miami Dolphins. If Tua is back, it should be competitive, but I still think Buffalo ends up rolling them. And I think the Bengals are going to end up wiping the floor with the Ravens. So that kind of sets up your next round with the Chiefs facing the Jaguars, or the Chargers anyway. That'd be a very fun game. I think the Chiefs, though, easily win that one. And then you'd have the Bengals and Bills, the Monday Night Football game that was was canceled anyway because of the injury to Damar Hamlin, who was released from the hospital. I think he's still going through tests anyway, last I saw. But overall, great news for Damar Hamlin that he's on the road to recovery. But that's kind of my playoff predictions for round 1 of Super Bowl Wild Card Weekend. In the NHL, trade deadline is about a month away right now. All-Star game is also about a month away, so kind of keep your eyes peeled for what happens there. There's some possibility that the Philadelphia Flyers could move Kevin Hayes or Provorov. Provorov anyway. We'll see what ends up happening there. The Vancouver Canucks, Bo Horvat, Brock Besser could be on the move. John Klingberg for the Anaheim Ducks as well. And we'll see how things work out at the trade deadline. In the NBA, trade rumors are certainly starting to percolate. We're seeing a lot of rumors coming out of Chicago about the DeRozan and Levine not being happy with each other and possibly one or both of them being moved. Kyle Kuzma supposedly is said to be available, but the Wizards would like to add another core piece around Kuzma, Beal, and Porzingis. And they're willing to move other pieces to be able to get another piece in there. I'd say they could either use a center or a point guard. We'll see if they're able to get either one done, or if they can't get a contract extension done with Kuzma, maybe they move him on. Fred Van Vliet, anyway, of the Toronto Raptors, could be dealt. He has 1 year left because he has a player option anyway at the end of this year. I expect him to opt out and go into free agency. That could be a piece that the Washington Wizards could try to go after. And then the Cleveland Cavaliers are said to be interested in Tim Hardaway Jr. from the Dallas Mavericks and Bojan Bogdanovic from the Detroit Pistons. We'll see what kind of happens there, but there's been rumors about a Karis LeVert and Tim Hardaway Jr. trade between the Cavs and Mavericks. We'll see if something happens there. I think they should make that move if I'm the Dallas Mavericks. You get off of a little bit of money here. I think Karis LeVert's a little bit better player, so you may have to attach a second-round pick to it to offload that money, and then maybe you can get Karis LeVert signed to an extension before free agency hits. But in either event, Tim Hardaway Jr. is kind of a streaky shooter. I think a more consistent player would be what the doctor ordered for the Dallas Mavericks. And then there's other rumors out there about Bojan Bogdanovic being of interest to the Dallas Mavericks. John Collins is pretty much all over the map as far as where he could go. The San Antonio Spurs, the Brooklyn Nets, the Boston Celtics, the Toronto Raptors, the Washington Wizards, the Golden State Warriors, the Phoenix Suns. He could be had here at the deadline. He has had his name in rumors for the last 3-4 years anyway. And it seems like this might finally be the time that they end up moving him. But we'll see where things go. The trade deadline should be very interesting in the NBA this year. I don't think we'll see, superstar level players. We're not going to see the, LeBron James type of trade. As much as I think LeBron would love to see some movement, go to LA and try to improve their positioning, try to get in the playoffs, I don't think that LA is going to be able to make the postseason this year. I think they're going to be sitting on the outside looking in once again. Clippers, I think, are a very good team. I think they could have the ammunition to make a big trade if they wanted to. Miles Turner has interested them in the past. We'll see if they're able to make some type of a deal there. But the Pacers are said to be trying to work out a long-term deal with Miles Turner. He is a Dallas native. I know Dallas has had interest in him in the past. If they're able to make the move for Tim Hardaway Jr. and get him off the books, make a trade of Bertans, get him off the books, free up some salary, maybe they could free up enough room to bring in Miles Turner in free agency this year. But that's kind of where things are in the NBA. But thank you guys for joining us here tonight. Again, the big news, of course, Carlos Correa, 6 years, $200 million to the Minnesota Twins. Gregory Soto goes in a 5-player deal to the Philadelphia Phillies. Johnny Cueto goes to the Miami Marlins on a 1-year deal with an option for a 2nd year as well. Brandon Belt goes to the Toronto Blue Jays. Luke Jackson to the San Francisco Giants. And kind of that's where everything is right now. Wade Miley's deal became official as well. And congratulations to the Minnesota Twins on salvaging your offseason, going from one of the worst off seasons in the MLB to one of the best. And sorry, San Francisco Giants, just every single time Carlos Correa's name is in the rumors, you're once again put through the ringer for how bad of an offseason you've had. I just don't think you've done very well. Conforto's contract, I think, is going to look like a lead balloon anyway by the end of it, and it's just not looking good for you guys, in my opinion. I love the signing of Stripling, love the signing of Manaea. Don't like the loss of Rodon. Don't like the salary you're giving to Jock Peterson. And I really like the addition of Mitch Haniger. But overall, your team is a little bit worse in that starting rotation. The lineup is a little bit worse overall, in my opinion, because they don't have those top flight free agents on board. Sure, it's a little bit better. They've made some additions offensively, bringing in Haniger, keeping Peterson, bringing in Conforto. But I think the one real piece there in that lineup for you is Mitch Haniger. He's the one piece that I think is going to be with you for at least the next couple of years because he has an opt-out after the 2nd year. That'll make that this offseason at least look salvageable. And we'll see what kind of years Manaea and Stripling have. If you're able to extend them the qualifying offer, maybe get something back for them if they leave and go elsewhere in free agency next year. But Correa goes to the Twins, 6 years, $200 million. Let us know in the comments section on the video that we have on our YouTube. You can check out that full video here as well as to what you guys think of the move. What do you think they're going to do next with San Francisco? Who are they going to bring in next year? What do you think the Mets do now that they've lost out on Carlos Correa? Or do you think they just stand pat? But thank you guys for joining us tonight, and we'll see you guys tomorrow evening.